Hello. Good evening, everyone. We are getting started. Just want to let you know that we are an active art school, so we have classes and students might be walking through here but I promise they'll be nice and quiet. Okay, and also if you would all silence your cell phones before we get started, that is always a good thing to do. I should probably include myself. Okay. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming out. Thank you for joining us for tonight's very special panel discussion on the work of James Howell. My name is Anki King. I am the Director of Admissions and Student Services here at the New York Studio School, and I am delighted to welcome you all to this evening's event in conjunction with our current exhibitions downstairs in the gallery, which you might have seen already or you will after the talk, Twilight, 21 Works by James Howell. Howell dedicated himself to the concept that art is a vehicle for harmony and enlightenment, and this is clearly visible in the works on view. We are joined this evening by the curator of the exhibition, Silvia Benedetti, Executive Director of James Howell Foundation, Laura Bardier, and art historian Alistair Rider. Following the discussion, we'll open the floor to questions. For those in person, please raise your hand, and I will bring a microphone to you so those who are joining us online can hear your question. For those on Zoom, please type your questions into the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. After the talk, there'll be some refreshments available downstairs, right at the bottom of the stairs, but we ask that you please do not take the drinks into the gallery. Finally, I wish to extend a very special thanks to everyone at the James Howell Foundation for their tireless work behind the scenes the past few months and for organizing tonight's event. Now, I am delighted to introduce our panelists for this evening. Silvia Benedetti is a Venezuelan, New York-based independent art historian, curator, and writer. She's a recipient of the 2023 Andy Warhol Foundation Arts Writers Grant. Her research focuses on opportunities to critically reassess and contextualize the work of peripheral creators globally, as well as the intersection of artistic and social practices. In 2023, she curated the exhibition Dadas las Circunstancias at the Clemente Solo Vélez on the Lower East Side. And she also co-curated with Lindsay Avalhay, I hope I say that right, Ways of Seeing, an exhibition at the Oklahoma State University. Some of her previous curatorial and research positions include Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum, the Bronx Museum of the Arts, and Dia Art Foundation. Her writings have appeared in publications such as Hyperallergic, Art Forum, and Post, Notes on Art in a Global Context. She holds an MA in art history and advanced certificate in curatorial studies from Hunter College, and an undergraduate degree in communications journalism from Universidad Monte Avila in Caracas. And I'm going to apologize where I get, the language is wrong. I think in Laura's I have the possibility to mess up 4 languages in your bio. Laura Bardier is a curator, writer based in New York City. Since 2018, Laura has led the James Howell Foundation, currently serving as the executive director, overseeing its incorporation and elevating its profile. She created a strategic plan that has successfully fostered a comprehensive and sustainable vision for the organization, expanding access, awareness, and engagement with James Howell's artistic practice. In 2014, Laura took the initiative to establish Este Arte, a platform that has radically reshaped the art landscape of South America. She has extensively written about contemporary art in publications such as Domus, Arte al Dia, and Review, and has curated many exhibitions. Bardier holds a Master of Arts in New Media Curatorial Studies from Donau Universität in Austria, and a Bachelor of Arts in Communication Design and Art History from Università degli Studi di Firenze in Italy. Thank you. And Alistair Rider teaches art history at the University of St. Andrews in Scotland, and for several years has been running the undergraduate core course in the theory and methods of art interpretation. His research focuses on late modern art, with a particular focus on sculpture, abstraction, and environmental themes. He's the author of the first monograph on James Howell, which was published by Circle Press in 2021, and there's an example of that down in the gallery. This summer, he has been revising a long essay on eco-critical and environmental approaches in art history, while also writing an article on the sculptures of German-Flemish artist Bernd Lohaus. His next book, which he hopes to complete over the coming years, will compare different strategies that artists have adopted for structuring their careers. Its working title is Ongoing: Notes on Long-Term Art Projects, so it might be a while. Before we start the panel, Joy Howell, wife of James Howell and president of the James Howell Foundation, would like to share a few words. So, Joy?
Can see me. Oh, okay. You have to see me, right? I have to see you. No, it's I can't see them. Oh dear. Yeah. Oh, this is. Wow. Karaoke. Here we go. Now, if I hold it like this, does it work?
You have to hold it fairly close to
A little more. Okay. Before Jim passed, we thought, well, what am I going to do with all this work? And long story short, we got together with friends, and we'd made through time, of course, his doctor back there, the Kempens, and Susan said yes, and architect Deborah Burke, and altogether we got enough to form a foundation, so that that was all set up. And then when Laura came aboard, we made it official. So it's great. Let's see. Soon, October 14th, I will have missed Jim for 10 years. However, he does weird things in the studio. He's still there. Yes. He said, 10 is the embodiment of time. 10 is one of his favorite numbers. It's a new beginning. And the 10 thing, new beginning, had also to do with the Suquamish Indians in Washington State, Bainbridge, up north. They were, he had lived there long enough to take on and understand their philosophies, and more of that later if you're interested. At his 74 Late Street studio, we dragged in all manner of metals. Gold is a color, silver and platinum are not, stainless is gray, and aluminum is brown. He was looking for the neutral gray. Gray was the embodiment of time. He once admitted with a smirk that his rigorous, methodical process might be a form of insanity. Let's see what else I got here to say. Much else. But he was fun. Living with him was fun.
Hi, Joy. Joy? Is there a better microphone there? We're having trouble.
If you could just
Oh,
point it right at your mouth, please.
pointing right at my mouth. Oh my God, I've got to start over. What did you miss? How do we know? Anyway, so here we are. Thank you all for coming. This is great. And the crew here, it couldn't have been nicer. Anki, thank you so much. And Kara, it's just, everybody's been so elegant and charming down there. Raymond and the staff is always so helpful. If I needed anything, they'd ask or go find it or get somebody who could. Let's see. Oh, let's thank Gloria. Let's thank Gloria Vanderbilt for the building. I love this building. I guess that's it. Thank you for coming. That's nice. Let's see. Yes. Jim would be so proud. Yes. You could have the room like.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight. And I'm going to briefly read something I wrote about the exhibition before we join the conversation. So my first encounter with James Howell's work was in 2022 when I was invited to the James Howell Foundation to attend a talk with artist Delcy Morelos, with curators Laura Bardier and Alexis Lowry. I was highly impressed with Howell's work on display at the foundation and how it was perfectly integrated into the beautiful loft on Perry Street, where he lived and worked. The very luminous and large space with polished cement floor and minimal furnished in white seems to be the perfect environment to understand the work of a painter exclusively devoted to light. Looking at James Howell's paintings in that environment made evident to me the discipline and rigor behind his work. And I developed a strong interest in researching his very unique investigation into abstraction. James Howell was born in 1935 in Kansas City and died in 2014 in New York. He received a BA in literature and a bachelor's in architecture from Stanford University. Early in his career, he admired the gestural paintings of abstract expressionists, but he did not want to embrace the impetuous, performative mark-making of artists like Jackson Pollock. He tended towards a more rigorous approach to abstraction, focusing on monochrome and the use of a limited palette to create his works. By the 1990s, Howell had arrived at his signature light into shadow paintings, which led him to the Series 10 in 1966, which would occupy him for the rest of his life and is definitely his most accomplished work. This exhibition, titled Twilight, focuses exclusively on Series 10, presenting 21 works from the series. From Series 10, Howell produced 71 sets that range from single canvases to multiple paintings, including one set with 31 paintings. In this exhibition, our idea was to show the intensity and the richness of variation which James Howell has treated the color gray, with a small selection of his work that would suit the given space. To fully understand James Howell's work, it is very important to understand the method he used to make his paintings. Using only square canvases, Howell divided them into 4, 5, 10, 28, 29 horizontal lines, which he painted with short vertical brushstrokes. He applied the acrylic smoothly and delicately with almost no trace of gestural painterly action. The materiality of the brushstrokes is only apparent when approaching the canvases from the side. From a distance, the paintings appear to be all gray. When we get closer, we see the subtle progressions of color from light to the top to dark, from light at the top to dark at the bottom. From sets of multiple paintings, the progression is visible from canvas to canvas by looking at the top line of each of the paintings. Prior to starting to paint, there was a lot of preparation by the artist. Howell perfectly mixed acrylic in varying proportions of warm titanium white, ivory black, and raw umber, all from a Cincinnati manufacturer. He increased his precision by using a viscosity meter to equalize the water content in the mixes and an extremely sensitive gram scale to isolate the proportions of each pigment. These measures helped him achieve an apparent and continuous gradual movement between tones to create infinite possibilities. For Howell, determining the proportions of color was necessary to create a neutral color scale so that the gradations appear evenly spaced to the eye. To darken a light shade in even gradations, a nonlinear formula is needed to mix the colors. To achieve these, Howell returned to the basic of calculus using 6 decimal places. Later, he created a computer program that helped him with a graduation of the tones. The exhibition is divided in 3 rooms. In the entrance, we have works on paper, drawings, and prints that can give the viewer a hint on how Howell's research and process. In the second and third rooms, we presented single canvases together with sets, showing each different gradations of light descending into shades. The 2 polyptych paintings conceptualized and shown as a single work. There are 2 polyptych paintings that are conceptualized and shown as a single work. Each canvas has the same dimension, medium, and number of lines. The graduation of color shifts across the canvas horizontally at the same time that each explores the vertical movement of light descending into shadow. We also have 5 units consisting of artworks that are seemingly identical. They share the same series and set, type of support, paint mixed in the same pot, dimension, and numbers of lines. These can be hung together or separately. In the exhibition, we have 5 of them installed sequentially, leaving an empty space as if was missing one, following the artist's indications. We also included different modes of display since Howell was also deeply interested in how to present the work. The exhibition includes 2 sets of progressions that the artist would normally install with a lighter canvas closer to the light source, which is not the case here because we don't have windows. In the exhibition, the viewer would also encounter an odd pair and a ruin, a displaced device he would use to present seemingly identical paintings, but skipping a space for a missing unit. There is so much that we can obtain by carefully looking at James Howell's work. We hope this exhibition entices even more the appreciation of his work. James Howell is one of those artists whose work becomes more fascinating the more you dig into it. His process is similar to weaving, not only pictorially, but also in terms of technique. Fine lines on the canvas serve as the warp, while the brush loaded with gray acts like the woof, creating a tapestry of tones, a tapestry that confronts us with a true idea of infinity. Thank you. now we have some questions. I wrote a few questions for Laura and Alistair. And I think my first question is for Alistair, and is how do you place James Howell historically in terms of art movements? He goes from abstract expressionism through an incursion into figurative painting to a highly restricted conception of monochrome paintings. So,
thank you. Is this switched on? Yes. Thank you, Silvia, for that. And thank you also for that very beautiful just introduction to James Howell. That was really very, very elegant and beautifully articulate. I suppose if we wanted to play the game of categorizing this body of work, which is always slightly problematic and challenging, but it sits in relation to two different bodies of minimal art, I suppose. West Coast minimalism, which is very interested in atmospheric effects and often takes inspiration from meteorological conditions. I'm thinking of somebody like James Turrell, for instance, or Doug Wheeler, and definitely, I think James Howell is inspired by that, or sees that as an affirmation of what he's doing. He spends some time in the 1990s in Los Angeles and is in touch with many of the artists during that period, and is kind of using that as a reference point. But he's also not quite of that school, because he's very interested in exposing his own method for making works. And he never moves away from a painting practice. He remains resolutely focused on painting. And so when he moves in the mid-1990s to New York, he spends time with another sort of school of minimal art, which is more literal in focus, and perhaps is best represented by people like, say, Robert Ryman. And there, the focus is on no metaphorical reference points. It's on exposing the conditions of the materiality of the paint. And James Howell is maybe best understood as sort of hovering between those two camps, if you like, within minimal art. On the one hand, very interested in creating the illusion of space through this flat canvas, so that these paintings really have an immense sense of depth. But at the same time, also wanting to show viewers all the sort of calculations and numerical work, the labor that goes into producing these things. So I think that's one way, loosely, of positioning him.
My other question is for Laura. Can you tell us a little bit about the formula and the program he created to do his work?
Yeah, sure. First of all, thank you. Thank you for the question, and thank you everybody for coming. Thank you, the team of the New York Studio School. It's been a pleasure to work with you. And talking about, yes, the formula, I think Joy also knows a lot. But, well, first of all, he starts something that is very interesting to me is that he started working with the computer in the 80s, something that not many painters were doing at the time. And he elaborates a formula to define the curve that the gradation is going to be built. And each one of the colors, the titanium white and the black ivory and the rose sienna that you mentioned before, are mixed, each one of them with a different formula, different curve, that each one of them is is very precisely calculated with a computer, but also measuring by hand, and then mixed with a lot of instruments, from the very precise scale and the viscosimeter that he had. And it's something that we can see in the shows in the works on papers. There's one of the works that is called Numbers, and it has the amount of white, the black, and the amber that he used in each one of these lines, or bands of stripes that each one of these works are created. I don't know if that is, yeah, thank you.
Now I have another question for Alistair. Do you know if Howell sees beyond the minimalist approach to painting? Does he has an aspiration towards the sublime?
Yes. Yes, I think so. I mean, definitely. I mean, another cultural reference point which might help to situate Howell perhaps is Josef Albers and his homage to the square, insofar as Albers is working ostensibly with a kind of rational system. He's very interested in a sort of pseudoscience of colours and the way in which they relate. But also the titles of these works are slightly kind of evocative. He calls his works, things that are suggestive of sort of sensitive states, we might say, or impressions. And there is definitely an element of that in James Howell. I think you're missing something if you see these paintings as psychological exercises, as sort of perceptual games. There's definitely an aspiration to immerse yourself in this sort of ambiance that he's constantly returning to, and the ambiance is of diminishing light or exposing yourself to an atmosphere in which perception is failing. There's always a constant sort of transition or motion towards a darker state. Very often in Western culture, we think of light as being something which brings clarity and illumination and focus. And that's actually not the case in this body of work. He's interested in a transition through that sort of through the sort of density of light, in a way in which light is losing energy, quite literally, and we're entering into a state of dispersion. And I think definitely that can be associated with an interest in sort of a higher state, an interest in which the multiplicity of sort of light conditions can be experienced and explored. Yeah.
Thank you, Alistair. And Laura, I would like you to tell the public, also maybe Joy can speak about it, but how he was immersed in Gray. His life was, how Gray was part of his life.
Well, yeah, that is a good question. Thank you. I wrote about something I can read a little bit, but James Howell works centered around a single color, gray. Unlike other color-filled painters like Joseph Albers, Urban Newman, and Martha Rocco, who explore a range of hues, his choice of gray stemmed from his experience from natural landscapes, actually. Particularly the gray horizons, the sea and the dawn and the dusk, and the sky and the water blur into boundless and tonal space. The twilight, that is the original of the title that Silvia and Joy worked together on that. And I think Howell's art aimed to capture the feeling of these landscapes through a subtle, abstract tonal variations, rather than representation, creating a calm and introspective atmosphere. Like Albers, in a way, as Alistair said, explore the tension between the physical reality of color and the psychological effects. But I think unlike Albers, I think he was looking for one mood, the gray, that is without tension. And he was looking into this balance, this neutral gray, this equilibrium of everything. The choice of the color gray is not just, it's not about the color. It's a philosophy, actually. It's a way of living, He was, Joy always tells about how he ate or how he dressed or how everything around him, he was always in research for this, like the gradations of the feathers or the silver or stones, something that is all around us in a way. And yes, I think I would like to quote him, actually. Gray embodies passages of time. It is mysterious and like its softness, simplicity, and space.
Thank you. I don't know if you have some questions.
Well, maybe we can open the floor to questions from the audience. Yeah. If anybody has any.
I can take one of the microphones, see if you can share the remainders. And then we can see if you have any questions in the audience.
Okay.
I could add something
Yes.
to what Lara was saying about grey, because when I was writing the book, I had great fun reading about grey. And there's quite a good literature which gets pretty philosophical rapidly. So Aristotle had some things to say about grey, Goethe, Oswald, Ludwig Wittgenstein, and a big theme that comes out, at least in the Western tradition, surrounding this colour is grey as a state of something losing its properties. So if you've got a colour like, for example, or white, and you add another colour to it, when it stops being recognisable as white, then you call it grey. And so grey is a sort of an in-between state. It's a state of sort of being, it's a state of transition between which acknowledges that it ought to have a property, but it's lost it. So it's it's the name we give to a property which doesn't have a property. And that state of being in between two things is tremendously important, I think, for James Howell. And so I became really fascinated by that. So much of our thinking involves thinking in binaries, in polarities, black, white, Republican, Democrat, etc., etc. You can continue ad infinitum, male, female, but instead, in Howell, we're interested in that transitional place in between, which is always mobile and never settles on one of those binaries or polarities. It's always in a relationship with those, but is in between. And hence the interest in movement, of light fading away. And so in a way, grey is not just a colour, and it's definitely not the absence of colour. It's an opportunity to explore a place in the middle of a spectrum, which is sort of looking in multiple directions.
Thank you. Also, Alistair, you were lucky to meet James Howell. So can you tell us a little bit about that very short experience?
James Howell was very unwell by the time I met him, and so I can't really speak of of him because we weren't able to have an extensive conversation. No, I met him in 2014. Yes. Yeah.
I'll ask a question.
As I recall from reading your bios, this is for Joy and also for Laura, from reading your bios that you are the president and executive director of the James Howell Foundation, if I'm not mistaken. And so I was wondering how it was that you got so interested and involved in his work that you would want to become involved with the foundation.
Joe, you want to answer? You want to answer?
Oh, you start.
I start? Okay. Well, I was, yeah. You can answer that. It's a nice story.
All right. There's a lot that's unsaid. Should I say about the policy? I think of it. Well, he was into space and time and all of this, so I can't really tell you, but he knew his own time. What was the question?
No, okay. How you got involved with the foundation? I can. You want to say?
Yeah, so I knew that it was over my head to, even though I had to help for several years, to document and maintain the work and all of this, and I just thought that the man had devoted his life to this thing, and it was just worth having a foundation. So.
Yeah, exactly. Joy is the wife of James Howell, and I was hired by Joy to create a foundation, and we worked together to preserve his legacy, and I think the work is remarkable, and it hasn't been seen. This is the first show in New York. It is amazing, and the quality of the work, it merits to be shown, and I think it can have the potential to influence many other contemporary working, living artists today, and that is what we are doing.
Can I insert something?
Yeah, sure.
It was Win Komarski who invited then Miklos van Bartha to visit the work and all of this, and one thing leads to another. Then Mickey's son in now London, the gallery is Niklas van Bartha and Daniela have a gorgeous gallery, and they represent Jim. That's how they go. They get connected, but there's always a something that takes it off, and we have to give that to Win Komarski, who then, through that, Jim had collectors and all of that, works on paper, but then along came these paintings, and then Mickey started in Switzerland, Basel, having exhibitions for Jim.
I wanted to ask each of you your take or your understanding of the influence of architecture in his work, starting with what do you see of the relationship of his work with architecture?
That's a very good question. I mean, there's a simple answer and a very challenging answer. The simple answer is he trained as an architect. That, I guess, you might already know. So he studied architecture at Stanford, qualified, and never really followed through on that. Decided very quickly that he wanted to focus on art, and was self-taught. He went back to art school later on, but initially he was self-taught, and he was working in a figurative style in that time, in the early 60s. So the simple answer is that he's interested in living in self-designed studio spaces, and he built himself a number of studio homes for himself over the years, as 3 in total. He's very interested in space and spatial relationships, but all of that is about the practicals of how he lives. But there's another bigger question, which is about, is there a relationship between architecture and what he's doing in Series 10 in the painting practice, which are about the destruction of form. This is a painting practice which is devoted to formlessness, which in a way is the antithesis of architecture. So you could see that although he's devoted to the métier, and respects the profession, at another level, within the frame of the canvas, it's about the dissolution of any kind of structure altogether. That I think would be the conundrum. Yeah.
Because I think Alistair said very well, and I don't agree on some things, but it's fine.
We always knew he was from another planet.
I have a question for Alistair.
No, it's fine. I think Alistair.
Yes, Alistair said very
good answer.
So I have a question for you, Alistair. So thinking about Jim's work, one of the big, he really loved Hiroshi Sugimoto's work, and you thinking about Jim's work in the atmospheric tense and looking at the relationship of nature, and I think about the horizon. How should we think about this in terms of light and the infinite spectrum of light as it occurs naturally? And as I look at the work, it's almost like there's an infinite possibility there. And talk to us a little bit more about the relationship with the natural light and the influence of nature in his work.
Okay. So it seems that James Howell was very interested in foggy conditions, and he writes about that quite a bit in his statements. Joy confirms that James Howell was very, very interested in sort of maritime light, and they would spend a lot of time together in Montauk when they were not in New York. And there are some beautiful photographs, some of which I've included here, of James and Joy on the beach at Montauk, looking on days when there isn't a clear horizon line, when the ground and the sky are atmospherically fused, and where there's so much moisture content in the air that you can't make out details. I mean, that's why fog is grey. It's because the light can't penetrate the moisture, and so everything loses colour and fades. And those are atmospheric conditions that he liked a lot. And at one level, you might think, why this fascination with sort of sensory deprivation? But I think that it's a way of noticing small variations, and that's something that he returns to repeatedly in his writings, and I think is evident in his painting practice as well. There's a fascination with the fact that if you're looking on a very bright day, everything is sort of extreme and sort of totally clear. But when you lose that in terms of light fading, then you have to tune in your eye and notice very, very small details perceptually. And there are many more details which you can't pick up with the eye. And I think James Howell is really interested in that, in sort of pushing the viewer's experience to a place where you can just make out a difference, but it's always slipping slightly. You can just notice that grey is different from that other grey, but then you move slightly away and you've lost it again. And so you're given an intimation that there is way more variation than you're able to pick up. And that, I think, is how he is constantly pointing to a world of experience of which is sort of withdrawn from us. It's there, it's present, but we can't actually always necessarily access it. But maybe on these days when it's very, very foggy and we're losing the ability to make out details and we're pushing our eyes to their sort of natural limits, those are the moments when we catch a glimpse of there being something more to experience.
Yeah.
Hi, I have a question. Thank you all for the presentation. It was very enlightening. All this talk of light made me think about photography. So maybe a good segue from the last question about Sugimoto's work. So I was just wondering, when we think about photography in the classical sense as being an image fixed in time, it in some ways almost feels like the antithesis of what James Howell was maybe trying to do. But I was wondering if you could speak to that, if he thought about photography at all, and anything you had to say about that.
Photography was actually something that he did often. He will go and photograph. Actually, there are some pictures that in the PowerPoint that he's photographing the fog in Montauk. And he will photograph gradations. He went to travel to, Scotland to see stones, standing stones, and he will photograph those stones. So it was always, I think it was in a way a preparatory, method, I don't think he saw the photography as an end product or an end project, because in fact he painted works on, the works on paper are sometimes in a way preparatory for the canvases, but they're not really always. But photography, he didn't exhibit photography, so that is also a clear difference. He used photography as a tool, but a very important tool, actually, I would say. Yes, there's a question.
Sorry.
Hi, I have a sort of general question. I was really intrigued by the works on paper in the exhibition, particularly the ones that are made up of numbers, and I was wondering if you could speak to that, if they're related to his paintings at all.
Okay, I can answer that. Yes. Or you want to answer that? Okay, well, the works on paper is a little bit of what I was saying. They are, in a way, preparatory. I mean, they are connected to the works in canvases, and they are essentially are the percentage, the amount of white in one column, the black in the second column, and the amber, the third color, in the third column, and is how they variate. And if you see next to the numbers, there is a graph with curves that is actually another kind of representation. So actually, what you're seeing is the painting. When Joy sees the numbers, she's seeing the painting. Because it is very remarkable that he. And he worked with actually 5 numbers after the decimal comma. So when you see 68.17, is like, well, you see 6817. The numbers are like 68% of white, or 18% of black, or like 14% of amber. So yes, that is a way, painting by numbers.
Thank you.
Way, it's another way of communicating those gradations in a different language, and it does appear as though James Howell was completely happy to work in numbers. He had a mathematical mind, and could see patterns in numbers, and that's a language which I'm afraid I don't have. But one way of seeing those works might be to see them as sort of musical notation, if you like. So it's the equivalent of musical notation to the performed piece. which is the painting.
And then we have a question from somebody on Zoom, from Carolyn Hack. She's asking, please talk a bit about the work's relationship to the Pacific Northwest and Native American attitudes and philosophy in the natural world and beyond.
That is a tough question. You want to?
So James Howell didn't originate from the Pacific Northwest. He grew up in Kansas City. Yeah, through high school age, and then he went to California, and then his first wife, Karen Peters, Sandra Whalen, was from the Pacific Northwest, from Bainbridge. And as he got to know Sandra's family, he fell increasingly in love with the nautical life or the island life of the Pacific Northwest, of Cascadia, this very, very beautiful and attractive landscape which stretches from Seattle all the way up to Alaska. And so the first half of his career is spent in this beautiful landscape, and he settles with Sandra on San Juan Island, right on the border of the United States with Canada, and he sails a lot, and so that landscape is very important for his art as well as for his life, and he resolutely refuses to leave it and move to a metropolitan center in order to pursue an art career. So he's very committed to being a regionalist. As for the relationship with indigenous communities, that I'm less qualified to speak about. So I really don't feel like I could speak to that.
Just respect to that.
Yes, yeah. I mean, there's obviously you can't live in that part of the world without acknowledging that you're a white settler and that you're living on lands which belong to First Nations, and I'm sure that there was an empathy towards those heritages and cultures. Yeah.
That makes me think of a lot of other associations that are coming to mind, or that have been coming to mind as I've been looking at these. Agnes Martin, thinking about what you said, that he was from outer space, and thinking about Joseph Albers being commissioned by NASA to choose the color for the inside of the first space capsule that would carry a person in orbit around the Earth. Bryce Martin, who you're saying that he's a regionalist, thinking about Bryce Martin stoned, traveling across Nebraska and then making that Nebraska painting, which has so much to do with that Midwestern space. Alfred Jensen, who's using numbers, and I wonder how you guys think of him in that context, or in any of those, and it's almost an encyclopedia of potential reference points. I mean, he was a regionalist, like isolated in Kansas, but he was so connected to what was happening in New York, what was happening in abstract expressionism and minimalism, and what Joseph Albers was doing in the Ivory Tower up in New Haven. How do you guys think about all of that?
He had 2 degrees from Stanford.
I can answer that.
Oh, you had 2 degrees from Stanford, first in literature, because when he left the Hill School, he was speaking with a counselor, and he said, Jim, if you told us that you couldn't read, we would have helped you. He had his hand, left hand tied behind his back when he was little, so he had to use his right hand. Consequently, he was ambidextrous, and when he couldn't use his right hand anymore, the painting since a certain date, I got it 2016, 2012, I think. After that, they're all the other hand, because he was so talented in either hand. So anything else was like that?
What I said is very broad, but I mean, maybe one way to kind of pinpoint it down to something we can talk about in an easier way is Forrest Best. Forrest Best is also a regionalist, maybe working at the same time. Would you say that he's leaning more mystical, like Alfred Jensen and Forrest Best, or would you say he's leaning more minimalist, like Joseph Albers and Piet Mondrian, maybe?
Well, yeah, these are categories that are quite general, and the challenge is that he's a unique painter, and so he's a bit of everything. He is a different type of artist at different times of his life, and initially he starts out as a figurative painter, and then he transitions into a gestural abstraction inspired by people like Willem de Kooning. And then he moves into colour field paintings in the late 70s. And then there's this sort of interim period in San Juan when he's very, very isolated from all art worlds and probably from communities on San Juan Island as well. I mean, he's living a pretty hermetic life, figuring things out for himself, and it's very difficult to relate anything that he's doing in those years to anything that's happening in the art world. And then when he moves off the island and comes to live in Los Angeles for half a year, each year, he identifies with sort of West Coast minimalism. But you see, as is often the case with artists who live outside of metropolitan centres, everything is a little bit belated. He's working in response to art forms and movements that have been around for 20 years, 30 years. And so he doesn't necessarily always find an audience at each stage of his career. And so when he moves to New York in the 1990s, minimal art is having a revival at that point, but there are so many other things going on in the New York art world that he doesn't necessarily have. Recognition isn't instantaneous. And so if we want to think in terms of sort of art historical chronologies of one movement returning to the next, then James Howell sort of falls through the gaps at many different stages. And I think what you said is very lovely, because you certainly can make lots of connections between his work and other painters, but not if you think in terms of strict historical chronologies. But in his art studio and in his mind and in his practice, I think you're right that those connections are there. Agnes Martin, I think, is a painter who it speaks to so many different styles of art practice, and certainly to Howell as well.
I can add also that he worked very independently from the market, from the trends, from everything that he was working around. Obviously, he was a researcher, so he was looking around what was going on around himself, other artists, but he was also reading about science, astrology, Asian cultures, like Asian philosophies. He was interested in a broad topics and areas of humanity. So I think it connects with many things that you said, but at the same time, he was on his single road. Yeah.
Great. Any last comments?
I do have a last comment.
Yes.
I would like to thank Silvia for this exhibition. It's been a pleasure to working with you.
Thank you, Joy. Thank you, Laura. Thank you to the New York Studio School.
Well, thank you for being here. Thank you, Alistair, for coming. He comes from the UK, especially for this. So we are very honored and very, humble by this present. Yes, of course. Thank you.
Well, then, thank you so much to our panel. As mentioned, there'll be some refreshments downstairs, and please look up the New York Studio School on the web. We have fantastic lectures coming up as well. Please come see the exhibition. It is amazing. And if anybody has questions about our programs in our certificate or MFA programs, please contact me. So thank you so much, everyone.